The Middle Ages and the Renaissance are not two distinct periods of time. They kind of overlap and they fade in and out of each other. So there's not a sharp, clear boundary, but it's fuzzy. The Renaissance era was advertised to mean the rebirth. Literally, the word Renaissance means rebirth. But when they say that, what are they talking about? The rebirth of what? They claimed, the folks of the Renaissance, that they had rediscovered Greek and Roman culture and that they were introducing it to the world. But that was not true. Prior to the Renaissance, the Middle Ages, the medieval scholars had known all about Greek and Roman culture. So we can't let the Renaissance people take credit for that. But they do get credit for architecture, for example. They developed a whole new style. To the left, you have the Middle Ages. To the right, you have the Renaissance. The window structures, if you notice them, are quite different. The Middle Ages had the pointed arch. The Renaissance has a rounded arch, but has a temple-like structure atop the window. Renaissance seems to have started in Italy, and there's several reasons for that. There was money in Italy, they had a good economy, and also a lot of artists and scholars fleeing the city of Constantinople, because Constantinople was being attacked and conquered by the Islamic armies, and so people had to flee, especially artists and so forth. Here you can see the map. Constantinople would be that purplish area, the map labels it as part of the Byzantine Empire there, around 1450, 1453, right where the Black Sea goes through to the Aegean Sea. That area was where Constantinople, the great city, was located, and it was going to be destroyed, so they had to get out of there and go straight west to Italy. They developed art styles. There's painting, there's sculpture. The Renaissance began in Italy but moved north as it developed. The mature Renaissance took place in the north and included not only art, like music and poetry and painting and sculpture and architecture, but also included intellectual movements, scholars who were writing books about literature and all that sort of thing. In Northern Europe, you have artists like Albrecht Dürer, photographic realism here. Here we see a more fantasy-filled engraving by Dürer. Self-portraits became a thing that was not common in art prior to the Renaissance, to do a self-portrait. Grunewald, another artist. And of course, the Renaissance, as a move forward out of the Middle Ages, began to really enliven the churches with new art forms. Altdorfer, landscape, becomes a new form of art. Landscapes had not been terribly popular during the Middle Ages. Okay, everyday life of the peasants with the brilliant colors, bright colors, Peter Bruegel. So all of this sort of Renaissance boils down to this concept of Christian humanism. You can enjoy life, and it's good to enjoy life. It's not a sin to enjoy life. Art, music, all these things were what God wanted for people. When we look at history, it's important to distinguish between things that are precise and clear and things that are blurry or fuzzy or ambiguous. Here's an example. We know exactly which date Charlemagne was crowned emperor. He became the ruler of almost all of Europe, and the date was December 25th. There's no ambiguity there. On the other hand, if I ask when did the Renaissance begin or when did the Renaissance end, there is no precise answer to that question. It's a movement. It grew organically out of people changing styles in poetry and painting, and there was no one date when it all began or ended. So what's precise and what's kind of fuzzy around the edges? Two different aspects to history. Johannes Gutenberg. This guy changed the world If you want your short list, top 10 most influential people in world history, Gutenberg definitely makes the list. Mass communication. Gutenberg invented the printing press, so books could be printed. Now, we're used to books. They're everywhere. They're in schools, they're at home, they're in libraries. But prior to Gutenberg, if you wanted to communicate something, you took a pen and a paper and you wrote it down. If you wanted a second copy or a third copy, you wrote them by hand. What this meant was it was difficult to circulate information widely. With a printing press, you could print 1,000 copies, 2,000 copies, get it out, send it around. Mass communication. You can compare it to the internet, to Twitter or Snapchat or whatever. The first book he published was a 4-volume edition of the Bible, still known as one of the world's greatest books. It was not the first thing he ever printed, but it's the first book he printed. Prior to printing books, he had printed some single-sheet tax forms, believe it or not, for the government, so people could file their taxes. From the printing press, we look at the Reformation, and there's a relationship between the two because the printing press is going to play a huge role in making the Reformation possible. And there's a plural, reformations. We're going to see there's more than one of them. What needed to be reformed? The church. There were problems, and we're going to see how that shook out. The church, as we know, the basic mission of the church is to educate people, to help the poor, and to provide spiritual guidance. And yet, sometimes other things were being done that were not really part of the church's mission. There was corruption. Sometimes people were taking advantage of the church's money. People who worked in the church would sometimes pocket a little bit of that money for themselves instead of using it to help the poor. Sometimes, instead of spreading spiritual guidance, they would use it to manipulate people and try to control people. So the Reformation was an effort to make the church better, more effective, to recall the church to its original task: education, helping the poor, and giving people spiritual peace, uplifting people. Most people who worked in the church were honest at this period of time, and we're talking about 1300s, 1400s, but there were corrupt people doing the wrong stuff, and the Reformation was out to fix that situation. Where are we talking? Bohemia, right in the center of Europe there. There's a guy named Jan Hus. He's working in the 1300s and 1400s. In England, there's a guy named John Wycliffe working in the 1300s. And of course, Martin Luther, there's Germany, worked in Germany in the 1400s and 1500s. All of them are criticizing the church. Okay, there's Hus on the left, Wycliffe on the right. Nice big beards. Gotta love the hat. Martin Luther picked up where Hus and Wycliffe had left off. He comes a few years later. Luther is the Reformation that really catches on. The previous attempts at Reformation with Jan Hus and John Wycliffe were good, but somehow they didn't catch on. And one reason was the printing press. Luther could write something, have 5,000 copies of it made, and have it scattered for 100 miles in every direction. He had mass communication. These reformers did not criticize the church because they wanted to destroy it. On the contrary, they wanted the church to be stronger and healthier and better. So they criticized the wrong things. They criticized what was going wrong in the church. They wanted to support the church, strengthen the church, so that it could do a better job of doing what it was supposed to do. Luther, 1483, 1546, lives right about the same time that the book is catching on, the printing press, the idea of printing books. Gutenberg's first book was in the 1450s, early 1450s, so the printing press is maybe 30 years old by the time Luther is there. The technology is being refined, upgraded. They're coming up with better ways to print, more effective, more accurately, more efficient. And Luther uses the printing press to spread the message of the Reformation, that God gives things as a free gift. So don't try to earn God's favor. Don't try to impress God. He's going to give you stuff for free. Just take it and be thankful. Also, the printing press allows you to study and read. You can get books, all kinds of books, and read them, starting with the Bible, of course, for Luther and Gutenberg, and you want to read that and make up your mind about what it means. You don't have to take somebody else's word for what it means. Timeline: Luther begins his Reformation around 1517. The idea is going to spread to England. The Radical Reformation will take place a lot of places like Switzerland, also in places like Belgium and Holland. The Counter-Reformation in Central Europe. So that's why we say Reformations, plural. The results of Reformations: freedom. There's going to be an increase in religious freedom. People are going to have different religions. They're going to be able to choose. Religion in your own language. So whatever your native language is, whatever it is you talk with your friends and family, you're going to be able to do religion in your own language, not be forced to listen to somebody else do it in a different language that you may not know well and may not understand. Bottom line is, we're going to see a lot of variety, a lot of diversity in religion, especially throughout Western Europe. Elizabeth I is going to be coming in the wake of the English Reformation, so she is post-Roman Catholic. She's Anglican or English Protestantism. Elizabeth I, major monarch, one of the longest ruling English monarchs, and her impact on history is huge. During the reign of Elizabeth, Spain is going to attack England and try to conquer it, but Spain will fail. The Spanish fleet, known as the Armada, the Spanish Armada, most of it sank. And that was a major milestone in Elizabeth's reign, cemented her place in the landscape of Europe, the political landscape, as one of the major monarchs. When we talk about the Reformation in history, it's best to use the plural, the Reformations. They were related movements, but also independent from each other. Luther had the first Reformation, the Lutheran Reformation beginning around 1517, but then there was the Anglican Reformation in England. There was the Radical Reformation led by guys like Calvin and Zwingli, and then there was the Counter-Reformation created by the Roman Catholic Church itself. So there is no one Reformation. There's a set of them. Just like the Renaissance and the Middle Ages are two sort of vague concepts, we can't pin them down precisely. The same is true of what is called the Age of Exploration. You can't name a certain day, month, and year when it began or when it ended. The boundaries, the edges of it are fuzzy. But there was a trend for a couple centuries of increased exploration. The Europeans were open to the world and eager to go out and explore, wanted to encounter different cultures, and we see a lot of motion, people traveling all over the place. What started the Age of Exploration? Two things, maybe three things. One thing for sure was a desire to trade. And different parts of the world had different products that the Europeans were eager to buy, and the Europeans had things to sell. So Europeans had technology, all kinds of metalworking technologies, instruments like sextants and astrolabes used for navigation. They had printing presses, etc., etc. So they had things to sell. There were things they wanted to buy, spices and fabrics and so forth. So the idea of wanting to buy and sell was one part of this. Another part of it was safety. The land routes from Central Europe to Eastern Asia had become very dangerous. They had to go through areas like Persia, which is now Iran, or they had to go through Babylonia, which was Iraq. And some of these areas had become less and less hospitable, and so travelers who were passing through with a wagon of goods to buy or sell would be robbed or murdered, and so a sea route would be a lot longer. You had to go around the southern end of Africa or the southern end of South America a lot longer, but a sea route would also be safer. The age of exploration, all of this traveling around, left a lot of markers that are still there today. The names of towns and cities and states and rivers and so forth. So, for example, in the United States, we have Charleston, we have Carolina, there's Maryland, Jamestown, Virginia, the College of William and Mary. In Canada, there's places like Prince Edward Island, there's Alberta, there's Windsor, Georgia is back in the United States. All of these are named after British monarchs or parts of the royal family, and they're the names that we work with every day. So the age of voyages, the age of exploring the world, left a mark in terms of these names. Just as the Renaissance is a little bit blurry, not quite a precise thing that we can nail down a starting date or an ending date, and there's a lot of different takes on the Renaissance, the politics of the same era are a little bit complicated, a little bit fuzzy around the edges. The ruling entity of the era was called the Holy Roman Empire, run by a family, a dynasty, a royal family known as the Habsburgs. The Holy Roman Empire was neither holy because it wasn't religion, it wasn't Roman because it was based in Austria and southern Germany, and it wasn't really an empire because the Holy Roman Emperor did not have the absolute authority that, for example, the Roman emperors did. So it's more like a loose coalition, a loose set of alliances based in Central Europe, primarily for the purpose of defending Europe against various invasions coming up through the area of what's now Turkey, or across the Mediterranean into southern Italy, or over by Spain across the Straits of Gibraltar. The Holy Roman Empire, a Central European defensive coalition, and the emperor was actually elected. He was not automatically born into the job, and further, he had to keep his electors, the people who voted him into office, he had to keep them happy or he could be bounced out. So it's kind of a murky situation. Now, we said there was a dynasty, a royal dynasty, a family, the Habsburgs, who ran this thing, and yet we also said that the emperor was elected. So was it inherited or was it elected? Which one was it? Again, it's ambiguous, it's confusing. It turns out that the electors, the people who voted on the new emperor, were usually inclined to pick a member of the Habsburg family, but it was not automatic, and they could use this power of theirs to leverage the emperor into doing things that he might not want to do, but all of his electors did. So the Habsburgs, the Holy Roman Empire, a loose Central European defensive coalition, a strange form of government, and one that doesn't always quite make sense to us nowadays. Okay, so I want to do a little thinking about these concepts, because there's a lot of different things that you read in different history books, things you hear people say. The Renaissance got a good reputation mainly through its own propaganda, its own advertising. The people of the Renaissance were pretty good about telling everyone else how good they were. So, for example, they said they rediscovered these ancient cultures. They said they were making new discoveries. They considered themselves to be Renaissance men and Renaissance women who were just excellent at everything. The facts are a little bit different. All of Greek and Roman culture was already known before the Renaissance. People were reading all the Greek and Roman classics. They had seen the artwork of Greece and Rome prior to the Renaissance. So the folks in the Renaissance didn't discover that or rediscover that. It was already there for people to study and appreciate. The Middle Ages, again, prior to the Renaissance, had already explored chemistry, math, physics, etc., etc. And we can see the roots for everything from modern algebra to the gravitational equations to modern chemistry to modern physics, all of that finds its roots in the Middle Ages. So the folks of the Renaissance don't get credit for that either. Now, we can say that the people of the Renaissance did come up with a lot of innovation in the fields of painting, music, sculpture, architecture, and literature. So the Renaissance was primarily an artistic movement and sort of may have overlapped with some attitudes in society. And that is something that we can give credit to the Renaissance for. Likewise, we hear things said about Johannes Gutenberg and the printing press. Did he invent it, the printing press, or did he just improve an already existing printing press? Well, it kind of depends on how you define those words. Prior to Gutenberg, there was, in fact, a very primitive form of printing which required each page to be hand cut into a wooden block and then printed. It was very cumbersome and didn't really save much time, didn't produce very accurate printing or accurate documents. So Gutenberg should get credit for inventing the printing press in any practical and modern sense. And not only did he invent it, but he changed society, he changed civilization itself by the printing press. The ability to communicate to thousands of people in a very short period of time was unique to Gutenberg's invention and did not exist with any prior invention. So communication versus mass communication, and really mass communication didn't even exist until the time of Gutenberg. So the Renaissance didn't rediscover anything. It was already known. It was not an era of scientific or mathematical progress. The Renaissance was more about art and subjectivity. It was about emotions and feelings and expressing those artistically. It was the Middle Ages that was more rational, looked at math, science, chemistry, physics, etc., etc. The Renaissance began out of a variety of factors. First of all, there was a growing accumulation of knowledge and learning during the Middle Ages, and the monasteries of the areas in Italy and Germany, France, England, Ireland had accumulated large libraries, and they had everything from ancient texts from ancient Greece and ancient Rome, as well as more recent scientific, logical, philosophical books written in the Middle Ages. So there was a growing library, a growing set of books that were commonly available to the scholars, at least, if not to the ordinary person. That's one factor that began this movement we call the Renaissance. Secondly, there was an exodus of the educated classes and the artistic classes from the area around the city of Constantinople. Constantinople was slowly encroached upon, was attacked, was whittled down over a number of years. It finally fell in 1453, but long before that, the smart people could see what was going to happen, and they got out of there. They came to places like Italy and brought with them the artistic and scientific and philosophical skills that they had honed. So you concentrated the educated class in one place. They all moved towards Western Europe, abandoning Eastern Europe. Finally, there was the physical evidence of previous societies and cultures, and these folks in Italy, for example, lived among the ruins of the Roman Empire, and those sort of provided an inspiration. Throughout the Middle Ages, of course, scholars were well aware of Rome and Greece and the ancient culture, the ancient heritage, both of literature and philosophy and science. So the Renaissance didn't rediscover ancient Greece or ancient Rome, but they continued what the Middle Ages had done in terms of processing that ancient heritage. There's also a geographical direction in the Renaissance. It began in the south in Italy, but as the Renaissance matured and refined itself, as the artistic and scholarly and creative aspects of the Renaissance matured, they moved northward. So the early Renaissance was in the south. The later Renaissance was in the north, in Germany, in Holland, in Belgium, places like that. Martin Luther is the center of the Reformation. As we've seen, there were reformers before Martin Luther who had similar ideas, but they never got any traction. They weren't able to make a major impact on society. Luther is the guy who really starts the ball rolling in a big way. After Luther, there are a few other reformers who came along, but Luther is the focal point. He's the hinge pin, and we need to look at who he was, what he did, and why he did it. Luther had a long career. He was born in 1483. The Reformation began around 1517. He lived until 1546. So he had quite a bit of time to speak, to write, to have in-depth discussions with academics, professors at universities, but also with rulers, princes and kings and people like that. And again, the printing press enabled him to send his ideas literally all over, so that Luther became a worldwide figure. So we can take a look at the map. Europe, after Luther is done, has pockets of different religious beliefs. The rulers of each kingdom, of each duchy or dukedom were free to choose a religion, and we see that there was large swaths of Roman Catholicism left from before the Reformation, but Lutheranism by 1560 already has a big following, and that will continue. There's also some areas on this map, if you notice the color coding, that are neither Roman Catholic nor Lutheran, and those are going to be the areas of the Radical Reformation, the post-Luther Reformation. So the European landscape has a diversity of religion due to Martin Luther. Prior to Luther, the map would have been one color solidly, and there was no religious diversity. So the shift, right, started in 1517. Luther posts 95 theses. What were the 95 theses? Contrary to popular belief, they were not a statement of what he wanted to assert. They were not his beliefs that he wanted everybody else to follow, but rather they were 95 topics for debate. He wanted to open up a lot of questions, and he wanted to recruit scholars to debate these things. So he began not by having a set of ideas that he wanted everyone to agree to, but he began by having a lot of questions that he wanted people to explore. Selling of indulgences was a big trigger for Luther. The idea that someone would sell a sheet of paper that had some writing on it and would convince people that this sheet of paper will get you into heaven, but you have to pay for it. And so people are making a lot of money, and they are keeping the ordinary individuals in the world ignorant of how things work and convincing them that somehow money will get you into heaven. So Luther was strongly opposed to that and knew that money was not going to get you into heaven. He wrote tremendously. His writings fill up many, many volumes. He wrote, without exaggeration, hundreds of short articles and pamphlets. He wrote dozens of longer books. And persistently he was saying you can't buy your way into heaven with money. You also can't earn your way into heaven by being good or doing good. Getting into heaven is a free gift from God, and you simply accept it and say thank you. So he was conducting negotiations with the people in the Catholic Church. Luther did not want to destroy the church. He did not want to break off and start a new church. Rather, he wanted to fix the church. He wanted to fix the Roman Catholic Church of his time. And he thought, well, I'll just explain this to some of these archbishops and some of these popes, and I'll just tell them what they need to do and how they can make things better. Luther was a little bit naive. He didn't understand that these folks weren't interested in improving the church because they were making money on a church that was corrupt. Fortunately, Luther got some friends. There was a group of German leaders, princes, dukes, earls, barons, kings, and they protected Luther from those who would try to kill him and help him spread his ideas. Later in life, old man Luther is going to talk about why he started the Reformation, and sometimes the stories he told were a little bit different in emphases. So when we ask why the Reformation began and why Luther started it and what he was trying to do, we have to look at what he wrote as a young man, what he wrote as an old man, and kind of wrestle with this. Okay, why did he challenge the church? Indulgences was the original reason. That was clearly the trigger for him. Later on, there were other issues that Luther found in the church that he wanted to fix. The fact that the church was failing to provide true spiritual peace, true spiritual comfort for people. The fact that there were people in the church getting rich, rather than helping people, which is the job of the church. They were just finding ways to get rich. Luther was opposed to that, of course. And eventually the education, basic education, reading and writing, was not being carried out as well as it could have been. And once you get beyond reading and writing, educating people in depth. Are you letting them explore, helping them to explore, encouraging them to explore all these great books? And again, he saw the church failing to do a good job there. So old man Luther is going to list all of these reasons why he started the Reformation, but the actual event that triggered it was the first one, the indulgences. The other reasons came along later.